Welcome, John Jenkins.
Thank
We're
you.
here to talk about your new book, The Partisan, The Life of William Rehnquist. I'm going to start with one general question, just to give our viewers a sense of who the Chief Justice is and why William Rehnquist was important. There have only been 17 chiefs, correct?
Correct, that's right.
And tell us a little bit about the position. What does a Chief Justice of the United States do, and the importance of William Rehnquist? And then we'll go into his chronology.
Well, the chief is really, he has two roles in the judicial system. He's first kind of the chief among equals on the court. He assigns the opinion when he's in the majority. He leads the discussion at conference. So he has a very important role to play among the 9 justices, and he's really the key guy there, particularly when he's in the majority. But the other thing that Rehnquist was, and that the chief is really the head of the entire administrative office of the U.S. courts. He sort of runs the entire court system, and that's a whole part of his administrative responsibility that the other 8 justices don't have. But that's what a chief justice does.
And we'll talk a little bit about how he got into that position, but let's go back to the beginning. Shorewood, Wisconsin, a suburb of Milwaukee. He was born October 1st, right around this time, 1924. His father was a paper salesman and his mother was a homemaker, but she was the dominant force in the household, right? Tell me a little bit about Mrs. Rehnquist and a little bit about how she got him to change his middle name, which was what changed the course of his life.
Well, she was very superstitious in terms of the middle name. They named him William Donald Rehnquist when he was born on October 1st in 1924. And his mother, though, believed, she was really a very, very fascinating woman. She spoke 5 languages in addition to English. Don't ask me what those 5 were. They're in the book. They're in a footnote in the book.
Right.
But she was very learned. She was very proud of her education at the University of Wisconsin. Both his father and his mother were Wisconsiners. They really hadn't traveled far at all, and they were very, very middle-class folks in the Depression. And the father, as a paper salesman, he had gotten through high school. He actually lost the family house. He was the breadwinner. And in 1939, his house was sold at auction in Shorewood, Wisconsin, in this very bucolic little leafy suburb of Milwaukee. It was sold for the debt that was on it, which was $7,000. So the family had been kind of through some very dire straits. They were also very conservative. They were America firsters, which meant they didn't want America to be in World War II. They were against the New Deal and Franklin Roosevelt. They were a very, very conservative household. Where that conservatism came on the parents' part, who knows, except that it was pretty common, I think, when I was doing my research, pretty common, commonly found in that particular suburb at that time, the folks that I interviewed told me. When Rehnquist was going into the Army, just to jump up a little bit on the last name, when he was going into the Army, his mother, who was very superstitious, and Rehnquist also was very superstitious.
He was.
And so his mother believed that if he had a last name,
a middle name,
I'm sorry, that started with H and had 5 letters in it, that would be good luck for him. And a numerologist had actually told her that. And so when he was going into the Army, he had researched his genealogy, and he found that he had a grandmother on his mother's side whose last name was Hubbs. And so he actually changed his name himself. And he told Harry Blackman, who was his seatmate on the court, he wrote a note to Blackman one day, and he said that he had changed it in high school. But actually, I think his recollection was probably incorrect, because he changed it when he signed up for the United States Army in early 1943, when he enlisted in the Army. At that point, they asked him what his middle name was, and he said Hubbs. And that was his name. He was always William H. Rehnquist after that.
It's so interesting, because he did tell that story to reporters toward the end of his life, with the idea being that the Hubbs made the difference, that H, and that I remember one of my colleagues quipped, so you would have been just a justice of the peace, right?
Yeah,
the
right.
Chief Justice of the United States without it. One of the more crucial moves in his life, after he leaves Milwaukee and goes to Stanford Law School, is becoming a clerk to Supreme Court Justice Robert Jackson. Tell us a little bit about how that came about, because I wanted to lead into what you unfold in here having to do with some of his conservatism on blacks and whites.
Right, right. Jackson was, I think, seen by then even as a great justice. Mm-hmm. And he had been the prosecutor at the Nuremberg war trials. He had actually taken time off from the court and gone to Nuremberg and been the chief prosecutor and then come back to the court. And so Rehnquist graduates from the Stanford Law School early at the end of 1952. He was actually in the class that would have graduated a semester later, but Rehnquist finished his work. He was so smart, he got out early. And so he wanted to, it was clear when I was researching through his papers and looking at the diaries that he had actually, that were on deposit with his papers, which were fascinating. He had 6 notebooks that were filled with his reminiscences and his desires and early comments and memoirs. And one of the things that was clear was that he really saw himself destined for some important job, he actually on the court probably, or certainly somewhere in government, because he had asked himself as a student, he had actually written, "What now, Honorable W.H. Rehnquist," with a big question mark.
As a law school student?
As a law school student, or as an early law school student. What now, Honorable W.H. Rehnquist? So that's really fascinating, because it really said that he had this feeling of almost a destiny to be on the court when he was very, very young. But there was this confluence of events where Jackson plays a role that allowed him to do that. He had a professor who had taken an interest in him, and so the professor was friends with Robert H. Jackson. And Jackson was going to be coming out to Stanford. You have to remember, it was hard to get out there from Washington in those days.
That's right. We're in the early 50s.
Early 50s. It was hard to get out there. It was rare for someone from Stanford. Stanford had a very good law school, and Rehnquist was just whip smart. But it was hard for someone who wasn't in the Ivy League to be a clerk on the court. It was very much an honor. And it was hard. Actually, the justices in those days, Jackson had been working with one clerk. So maybe 9 people or 10, 11 people a year are getting these clerkships, not many.
Now,
and they're coming out of the Ivy League.
Am I remembering right that Justice Jackson comes out for a groundbreaking for the law school? What even brought him out there?
Came out with 2 things. Well, what really brought him out was the Bohemian Grove. All right, so there was this Bohemian Grove, which is in a place called Monte Rio, California. I've actually worked on another story about the Bohemian Grove, so I know that place well.
Men's club.
Right, it's a men's club. It's all men. It's 2,000 men getting together kind of at a summer camp, and they do it every year as there was a Bohemian Club in San Francisco, and it hosted this confab of corporate decision makers, government luminaries, diplomats, very, very important people. Probably the equivalent today of, some of the big events that happen in Aspen and out, and when you see folks in shirt sleeves kind of rubbing elbows with each other. So Jackson actually was coming out in August of that year, of 1952, to do that. And so his professor said, first he asked Jackson, would you come, and there was a groundbreaking of the law school, would you come out here and speak at that? Jackson agreed. And then the professor surprised Rehnquist by saying, I'm going to arrange for you to meet him. Now the interesting thing is that Rehnquist did meet him and met with Jackson, and Jackson just kind of didn't even really interview him. He talked about, Rehnquist had a Swedish ancestry, which he talked about a lot. It was kind of a talking point of his always. And so Jackson got off on this tangent of talking about his Swedish clients that he had had, and told Rehnquist some stories, and Rehnquist really didn't get a chance to really talk about himself very much.
To impress him with his smarts.
He didn't really think that he had done a very good job in the interview. And Jackson thanked him and said it was nice to meet you and went on his way, and that was that. And so Rehnquist doesn't hear anything now for a couple of weeks. And so he starts getting worried, and he writes a letter to Jackson. And he says, you know, I'm in my last semester of law school. I really have to kind of